Okay, I'm going to try my best to restrict this to under 10 minutes. I'm in a different location today in my living room, just in case you're wondering about that. And as I'm sitting here, I'm watching the news from various channels, and of course the main story on every channel, with one or two exceptions, is the campaign against Islamic State. I'll just show you in the background. This is BBC Parliament. We have Sky TV, so this is BBC Parliament. I've put the mute on, but maybe you can see that in the background, MPs, that's actually the House of Lords, Britain's upper house, are debating intervention in Iraq, and it's on every network. It's controversial. It's controversial, but not as controversial as 2003. I think one reason for that is there's several reasons for it. Firstly, Britain as a nation has been involved in wars now for about 15 years. From the Blair administration to the Brown administration to the Cameron administration. More often than not, of course, this has been highly controversial both at home and abroad, and that's understandable. So perhaps it's that war weariness that means there isn't as big let's say, controversy over this as there was in 2003 with the big Iraq invasion. There has been a few Stop the War coalition protesters outside Westminster. I'll get to them in a minute, but I think that is the explanation as to why there's something of a muted attitude from the British public. There is quite a lot of people online, especially on the Labour Party Facebook page, who are coming out with the usual sort of cynical attitudes about it, and I support their right to an opinion, but I really take issue with some of the things that they're saying. That's in response to Ed Miliband updating his post and saying that he supports these airstrikes. Now, just to cut to the chase about my stance on this, I've said in previous videos that I think that ISIS is absolutely barbaric. I think anyone with their head screwed on properly would recognise that. We're dealing with an organisation here that is very lucid. Its numbers are uncertain. It's spread across several countries. It has volunteers. Every time their members die, they get more volunteers. From that point of view, it is a very dangerous organisation. Probably more ruthless than Al-Qaeda. So no one can underestimate that this organisation poses a threat. I lost my patience the other day with one person who commented on that post on Facebook, ISIS are no threat to the UK. Now, I really want to shout over the screen, wake up. If you don't believe politicians, if you're cynical about that, then listen to their own propaganda. Actually don't, that might end, you might end up getting in trouble with the Home Office, but the point here is it's incredibly naive to think that there's no threat from ISIS. I mean, we have young recruits going over there, young jihadists who are brainwashed, and who've explicitly made threats against the United Kingdom. So to say that there's no threat is just sort of rubbish. And this tends to come from people who are very, very, very hostile to Western policy. There's a few things I would say here. Firstly, even if you hate Western policy, even if you think the airstrikes are a complete mistake and everything's misguided and so on, you should at least acknowledge that there is a threat from ISIS. I mean, I think that saying there's no threat is actually an insult to the families of those journalists who have been beheaded by these savages. I mean, of course they're a threat. Wake up. It doesn't mean that they're going to attack us tomorrow. It doesn't mean there is an imminent threat. But there is absolutely a significant threat from this organisation, because British border patrols are not wonderfully secure. If one of these young recruits comes back brainwashed, battle hardened, it's very conceivable that they might try to attack the UK. I mean, so the idea that there's no threat is utterly absurd. There will be those who say that the threat is exaggerated in order to justify airstrikes, and there will be those who say it's all about oil and so on. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and say that there is no vested interest when it comes to Western policies in the Middle East. Of course there are. And it would be naive to say it's just about human rights and a humanitarian mission. It is about strategic interests in the region. Okay, I'm not going to dispute that. But that still doesn't negate the fact that something needs to be done about this organisation. Obama has been very keen to point out that this is an international thing. It's US led, but there's strong Arab support, and there's an increasing number of countries joining the coalition in terms of airstrikes. And about airstrikes, I agree with those who say that airstrikes alone cannot be the answer, because what they can do is slow ISIS down, but they can't necessarily stop it. Of course that's true. But nevertheless, it can play a part in weakening the advance of ISIS. Now, I know this from first-hand source. I've got friends in Kurdistan. I'm not going to go into details, obviously. But basically, those people have told me that the airstrikes on ISIS have helped the Peshmerga, which is the Kurdish freedom fighters, the Kurdish militia. That has actually helped them, strategically speaking. Now, historically speaking, I'm no military expert. It's my understanding that airstrikes alone, without any sort of ground action, cannot win any sort of battle. But I'm against a ground force. I'm against boots on the ground, simply because in our last Iraq intervention there was far too many military deaths. The British public got disillusioned, and I don't think the British public would support that. At the moment, the BBC reports that 57% of the British public support airstrikes, so there is a moderate majority in favour of airstrikes. I believe what there needs to be is an Arab ground force, not Western, not American, not British, not Canadian, but an Arab ground force to support Western-led airstrikes. I think that might be plausible, because then they can't turn around. ISIS can't use that as propaganda and say, oh, they're crusaders, if it is Arabs that are leading that ground force. And you have some very powerful countries in the region. This may actually be a golden opportunity for Saudi Arabia and Iran to patch up their differences and work together. That would be a wonderful development for the region, because it would then bridge the Sunni-Shia divide, which is one of the Middle East's biggest problems. I honestly believe that powerful countries, regionally powerful countries, like Saudi Arabia and Iran could do that. Hell, even Israel. Now, I'm fully aware there's still controversy from this year's Gaza conflict, but let us be under no illusion as to how serious this problem is for the whole region. So countries should stop their bickering and come together, because this is a problem that threatens the whole region, and by extension beyond that. Also, powerful countries like China and Brazil and India should play an increasing role, I think. It shouldn't always be down to NATO countries and Arab countries. And anyone says they don't have any interest, well, there were Chinese jihadists arrested by the Iraqi forces, so this is a truly international thing. A few final points about the cynics. I fully understand why people will question airstrikes, because we have been involved in so many overseas operations that have resulted in a very less than perfect situation. I mean, I have reservations about it. I don't think that airstrikes alone can be the answer. So that's an entirely legitimate concern. And I'll even respect people who say we're against the airstrikes, but we do acknowledge that ISIS is a barbaric organisation. But what I have no patience for is those who condemn and vilify NATO or any countries involved in this and say, oh, it's all our fault, we should do nothing. That's basically the message they send out, and they cannot bring themselves to condemn ISIS. Those sort of people I have no respect for, no respect whatsoever, because not only are they insulting the victims of ISIS, they've got their head in the sand. I mean, it's entirely legitimate to scrutinise Western foreign policy, but at least you should balance that out with recognising what sort of organisation ISIS is. And I've seen people who just cannot bring themselves to do that. Those people I've got no respect for, because I don't think that they're looking at the whole picture, and I don't think that they're actually contributing. I mean, I support their right to a view. I'm not saying they shouldn't have a view. I just think they're deluded. And it really frustrates me. I mean, these are people who constantly demonise their own country, their own government, and yet they just cannot be open-minded enough to recognise that ISIS is a fascist organisation. So they should say something like, we don't think airstrikes will work, but we know that something needs to be done about ISIS. That would be a reasonable position. But some of them can't even do that. So anyway, in conclusion, I support the airstrikes for those reasons. I hope there's minimal civilian casualties. Unfortunately, it's impossible to guarantee that. But I'd be against the ground invasion from Western forces. I think that should be Arab-led. So Western-led airstrikes, although there has been Arab support in that as well. There was UAE woman pilots who who took part in some of the first airstrikes from the UAE. There should be airstrikes coupled with ground intervention from Arab states, and in this regard Turkey needs to lend a much bigger hand to help the Arab states. So that's my thoughts on the situation. I've went a little bit over the time, but all of those things had to be covered. I don't want to see a third Iraq war, I don't want to see ground forces, but something clearly has to be done about ISIS. Meanwhile, at home, we need to combat the ideology, and in that regard I support imams and mosques who are trying their level best to do something about this. Okay, cheers.